So let's talk about going from your sketched idea to making a photographic image. Firstly, it's really important to say that you don't actually need to stick to your sketch completely. There is plenty of wiggle room for, once you get into your location, adapting to lighting, to unexpected things, and going with that and playing with ideas. And you might actually end up with an image that might be even better than your original sketch. Also, in my own experience, I found that sometimes what I think are the best sketch ideas don't actually really work as a photo. And conversely, sketches that I've done that I've thought are a bit meh, and I go and make a photo out of them, are absolutely fantastic and really work well as a photographic image. The most important thing is that your final image really transmits the emotion that you're trying to get through in your image. These are some of the sketches of final images that I've made. In these examples, you can see that I've dramatically changed some of the elements in the photos. But actually, the final images came out really strong. So let's talk about equipment. First off, it's really important to say you do not have to have a fancy camera in order to do this type of imagery. You can even use your camera phone in order to get the type of shots that I make. I'm not going to go too much into camera functions or more complex exposure and explain all of this. There's plenty of information online that you can find. Let's just focus on the principles of taking a self-portrait, which means you're either going to need a tripod, your camera set on a tripod and using the self-timer mode, or you might have a friend at hand that can press the shutter release for you. Most cameras have a self-timer mode on them, as do pretty much most phones. You might not have used this before, and it will differ from camera to camera. So it might take, I don't know, watching a little YouTube online video just to have a look at how that mode works. If you do have the budget to get yourself a distance shutter release button, that can help a lot. So it stops you from having to run in to set the camera on its self-timer mode and then run into the shot. I'm going to explain to you how to do two different types of self-portraits. Number one is going to be a single image where you use colour and light and composition to create an emotional shot. The second type of image that I'm going to show you how to do is going to be a composite of 2 or perhaps 3 images. And then we're going to use a photo editing tool to take these shots and put them together to make one single image that defies logic. So I'm not going to go too much into lots of techie stuff. If you need to, you can find lots of information online. So once you're at your location, it's important to think about what you can use that's around you in your image. So you might want to think about the lines that are occurring in your image. Are there any lines in the landscape that you can use to create interest? A common trick is to use leading lines to draw the eye to the main focus of the image. Did you know that smooth, undulating lines can give an image a calm and softer feeling, whereas zigzags or lines that cross can create a sense of drama? Another really important thing to consider once you're at your location is the lighting. Is it a bright sunny day, or is it cloudy and overcast? When photographing on a bright sunny day with really strong directional light, you need to think about where you're going to position yourself in relation to the sun. Most people advise against shooting into the sun when shooting out on location. However, there are times when this can work really well in creative portraiture. I've chosen this spot on the beach because I've just found it really interesting. We arrived here, didn't realise this boat was going to be here, but it's just too good not to use. So one of the barriers that I faced when I first started doing this was just feeling like a bit of an idiot, really. I often chose to go to places where I wasn't going to run into many people just because of the type of things I'm doing whilst I'm photographing myself. I find it easier to go to remote places or I like to go to green places in the countryside. So also it's not just a process of making the picture, but the actual journey that you're going on can be absolutely lovely and really take you out of yourself. So it can become an exercise that's actually really mindful. Now it's time to set the shot. So get your camera on a tripod, make sure it's somewhere that's level and it's not going to move around. Setting yourself timer, again, as I said, is different for different cameras, but you want to make sure when you're focusing your shot, you want to make sure it's on manual focus so that once you run into the shot, it's not going to change. You might, in some cases, need to use your camera bag or something in the shot, get it focused on where you're going to be in the shot, and then remove the object once you're out of the shot. So on to the second shot. I'm actually just going to have my legs in this shot. We're going to keep the composition really, really simple. So we're going to do an image using multiple images and layer them together to make them look like they're one image. It's important to consider what you're going to have in your shot. Obviously, it's also important to consider what you're going to exclude from the shot. Remember that you're deciding what your story is about. So it's your perspective on this particular scene. And that's really important. Using the rule of thirds, I'm going to put my horizon line and my shore line onto those two lines. The rule of thirds places the main subject at the intersection of horizontal and vertical lines that divide the frame up into segments of 1/3 each. The most important thing that you need to do when you first start is to, once you've got your camera on a tripod, is to take a photograph of the background with nothing in it. So before you get into the shot, you need to have your base layer, you need to have your background without you in it, so that you've got the detail, so that later on when you come to rub bits out, you've got those details underneath. Once you've got your first shot of your background, your scene with nothing in there, then you can put yourself in the image. Make sure that the focusing hasn't changed. You've got to keep the focus the same throughout. Again, I'd urge to use manual focus. For this shot, I'm going to use the remote shutter release because the position I'm in doesn't allow me enough time to run in with the self-timer. I'm going to take several shots using several different positions of my legs so that later on when I come to edit, I've got choices.
In its simplest form, the process of editing this shot is pretty straightforward. I've taken two shots, one of the scene, the background, and the same shot again, but with me in it. In Photoshop, I'm going to lay the second image over the first one, apply a layer mask, and then rub out the bits that I don't want to leave me with my final image. For this demonstration, I'm using Photoshop. However, if you don't have it, there's plenty of free editing software that you can download online. So, now that I've opened both of my images in Photoshop, my first step is to lay the image of myself over the image of the background. I'm doing this simply by dragging it over and laying it over the top of the other one. It's really important when you're doing this to make sure that the images are stacked one on top of the other exactly in line. You might need to flip back and forth between the two images and nudge it up and down a bit just to make sure it's exactly on top. Great, that looks good to me now. Once I'm happy that my images are perfectly aligned, my next step is to add a layer mask. To do this, simply click on the layer mask icon, like this. Now I've got a transparent layer mask that covers the image of myself. What I want to do next is to invert this layer mask so that it's black and it hides me. Making sure your layer mask is selected, press Command-I on a Mac or Control-I on a PC. As you can see, the layer mask has turned black and I'm now hidden by it. Now I'm going to select the brush tool. You can select it by going to the toolbar on the left hand side, clicking on the brush tool icon, or you can use a shortcut, Command B on a Mac or Control B on a PC. you can easily change the size and strength of your brush in the brush tool settings. Now I'm going to paint onto my black layer mask in order to reveal my legs that are in the image underneath. You're going to need to paint using a white paintbrush. You can change the colour of the paintbrush by clicking on the black and white squares at the bottom of the toolbar. Also, you can flip between black and white paintbrushes simply by pressing X. So, using my white paintbrush, I'm starting to paint back in the details from the image below that I want, namely the legs, but also some of the shadows. I start by very roughly painting in the main bits that I want. Then I zoom in and use a smaller brush in black to get rid of the bits that I didn't. This process can take a bit of time. It's important to be patient with it and try and enjoy the process. If you take too much away from the mask, you can always add bits back by changing the colour of your paintbrush. You can change the size of the brush you're using easily, and it's important to think about the hardness of the brush. The closer you are to your subject, the more important it is to be careful of the edges. You can use a softer brush to slightly blur the edges so that your subject doesn't look stuck on or obviously photoshopped. In softer areas of the image, like the shadows, you can decrease the opacity and flow of your brush. This will give a more realistic finish. So this is taking quite a while, so let's speed this up a bit. It's important to keep zooming out of your images just to check the progress and see if you're happy with the image. Once you feel happy with your image, the last thing to do is to save it. For this image, I've decided to call it Legs 11.